Hello folks, it's Space Chaser again. Welcome to another video, and this time we're going to look at some photos of the railways and the pier at New Holland in North Lincolnshire. Now New Holland is probably best described as a railway village in the same way that Crewe is a railway town. Thanks to the establishment of a rail-served pier from which a ferry could cross the river to Hull, it's acquired two stations, an engine shed, a rail-served dock, a railway hotel and a laundry which dealt with the mucky linen from the Great Central Railway's restaurant, cars and its network of railway hotels. A number of terraced houses were built to accommodate workers from the various facilities. The stations were New Holland Pier, built on the end of the pier itself, serving the ferry, and at the landward end there was the optimistically named New Holland Town, although the settlement itself never really achieved modern village status. Even today it's only got about 1,000 residents. Now I know what you're thinking, Space Chaser, where is it? So we've got a map. New Holland, as you can see, is just there. Hull is across the river. Got Barton on Humber there. If we come down a little bit, you've got Immingham and then Grimsby and Cleethorpes a bit further along. Go over the other way, you've got Scunthorpe. And if we go up there, you can see Wintringham on the Humber bank, Brough, and North and South Ferriby. They'll become important later on in the story. So before looking at New Holland's railways, it might be helpful to look at the history of crossing the River Humber. The first people recorded to do so were the Romans. They had a road from London to Lincoln, known as Ermine Street nowadays, and in the 1st century, around 47 AD, they extended it northwards from Lincoln to York. It crossed the Humber between Wintringham and Brough. Brough was known as Petuaria and Wintringham was Ad Arbum. Some local history sources state that the river was crossed by means of a ford, which would be possible. People have walked across the River Humber. The first one recorded was in about 1953, although it wasn't classed as an official record because in the 19th or 20th century, a deep water channel was dug on one side of the Humber to allow bigger ships to sail up it to reach places like Goole. And the person who walked across had to get a boat across from the bank over that deep water channel to a sandbank, and then he walked the rest of the way from there, so it wasn't classed as an official record. However, in 2005 somebody did walk across the Humber, and I believe the same gentleman has done it a couple more times for charity as well, so it is possible, and it would have been possible to ford it. However, most of the sources, including Wikipedia, state that they used a ferry to get across the river. It was known apparently as Transitus Marimus, which translates as very great ferry. So next after the Romans came the Danes, and they had a ferry between North and South Ferriby. The clue's in the name. Ferriby means place by a ferry. And they were there in about 900 AD. That's when they first started running a ferry across the Humber. The next recorded one was in around 1315 when a service started from Barton on Humber to Hull. I believe at one time there was a Barton to Hesel service as well, but I've not been able to find any records of that now. I want them. But Barton to Hull is mentioned. As far as we know, it ran continuously for over 500 years. It was still going in the 19th century. In 1804, the first attempt at running one from New Holland to Hull began, but it wasn't successful. It ended after a short time, and there were a couple more attempts, but again they were unsuccessful. In 1826, a successful service began from New Holland to Hull, and that one stayed and remained in operation. In 1845, both the Barton to Hull and New Holland to Hull ferries were purchased by the Great Grimsby and Sheffield Railway Company. They decided to invest in New Holland. A pier was built to serve the ferry, and a railway built along it. The railway line ran from the Grimsby to Gainsborough and onto Sheffield line. It branched off at Hayborough, it came up from Ulsterby to New Holland, and it went along the pier. That line opened on the 1st of March 1848. The link from New Holland to Barton on Humber was opened on the 1st of March 1849, exactly a year later. And not that it's relevant to what we're doing here, but Immingham to Goxhill opened on the 1st of May 1911, Goxhill being between Ulsterby and New Holland. And the Immingham line operated to 1963 when it closed. But to go back to the 19th century, as we said, the Great Grimsby and Sheffield invested in New Holland. And after all the works had been completed and the new ferry service had got itself established, they decided to close the Barton to Hull route in 1851. And passengers from Barton obviously caught the train up to New Holland and got the ferry from there. So the ferry remained under railway ownership until it stopped operating. The Great Grimsby and Sheffield became part of the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway, which in turn was renamed the Great Central Railway at the end of the 19th century. The Great Central became part of London and North Eastern Railway at the grouping in 1923, and London and North Eastern became part of British Railways upon nationalisation in 1948. British Railways renamed itself to slightly punchier British Rail in 1964, and the ferry went under their Sea Link division until it ceased to operate in 1981. It was operated by paddle steamers that could operate at all states of the tide. As we said, the tide gets quite low and it is possible to walk across the Humber, although I should stress I don't recommend doing so. But the paddle steamers could operate at the lowest state of the tide. In 1974, a diesel-electric paddle vessel named the Farringford was transferred from the Lymington to Yarmouth route to help the steamers out, and in 1978 the last of the steamers was withdrawn from service. The pier itself went through various trials and tribulations. In October 1869, a major storm sank the pontoon that linked the pier to the actual ferry. The pier station was destroyed by fire on the 13th of January 1895 and had to be rebuilt, and in 1923 the pier and New Holland Pier Station closed for reconstruction, and it was fully reopened by the 19th of March 1928. The small engine shed that had been established at New Holland was closed in 1938, but it remained as a stabling point with fewer and fewer walls according to the photos that have been taken of it, but shunting locos were stabled there up to the 1960s. As we mentioned earlier, the Immingham Rail service ceased in 1963, and by that stage the longer distance services to New Holland had also ceased. It left a service through to Cleethorpes and one to Barton-on-Humber. I can show you a timetable from 1980. Although this is a bus timetable, it has got train times in because, of course, British Rail and the bus companies were nationalised. Lincolnshire Roadcar was part of the National Bus Company. And therefore, in a fit of joined-up thinking that everybody will be proud of today, they put the train times in the bus timetable as well. So there's the weekday timetable. You can see there was a service from Cleethorpes to New Holland Pier and one from New Holland Pier to Barton-on-Humber, and they both ran roughly every 2 hours. The normal method of work at that time was for a unit to come in from Cleethorpes to New Holland and then form a Barton service, and the Barton service would come in and form a Cleethorpes service. So the units interworked between the two routes. As an aside, New Holland had regular bus service as well. You can see there was a Lincoln to Brigg service, and then the bus turned into a Brigg to New Holland service as well. So you could go straight through from New Holland to Lincoln on the bus. Through fares were available. And just finally for New Holland, they also had a regular bus service to and from Scunthorpe, the number 110. And Lincolnshire Roadcar used the station forecourt at New Holland as an outstation. They left one or two buses there overnight. Just before we leave the timetable, you can see a little footnote at the bottom there about the Humber Bridge due to open later in 1980. So check that the service was still running and the connection to and from the ferries. And that leads us on to our next part of our story, the end of the ferry service. In 1973, construction of a bridge over the River Humber, called the Humber Bridge, began. And it opened on the 24th of June 1981 at 11:30 AM in the morning, and the ferry service from New Holland to Hull ceased at the end of that day. From the same date, the remaining railways at New Holland underwent some massive changes, and I'll show you a couple of little diagrams. I've not used a rubbishy homemade map in one of my presentations for quite a while, so I'm going to use one now, or two to be more exact. So that is how New Holland's railways looked at their zenith. You got the line coming in from Grimsby via Gox Hill, and then it went round to New Holland town there and up onto the pier, as you can see. And then there was a spare round from New Holland town station to the Barton line. The engine shed was there, and there was a little spare round directly from Barton to Cleethorpes that was mainly used by freight traffic because most passenger trains served the two New Holland stations. So in 1981, with the ceasing of the ferry service, a new halt was built on the former mainly freight only line, the direct line between Barton and Cleethorpes, and that was just called New Holland. The connection onto the pier was retained and the pier itself was sold to a firm called New Holland Bulk Services, who imported things like grain and coal via it. They left the railway in place. Indeed, they laid 3 sidings on the site of New Holland Town Station, and they tried to get British Rail interested in moving their freight traffic, but it didn't have much success. There were a few trial runs over the years into the 2000s and privatisation, but none of them actually took off. You'd have the odd trial run and then that was it. There was never any regular traffic. The direct spur there was served by a new Barton-on-Humber to Cleethorpes through service that ran every hour. It was the best service they'd ever had on the line, I think. Introduced in 1981, it connected at Barton-on-Humber with buses to and from Hull and Scunthorpe, and the connections were guaranteed because the bus companies, as I said earlier on, were nationalised as well. The privatisation and deregulation of bus services in the 1980s meant that the connections weren't guaranteed anymore, and in the early 90s, I think it was 1992, the service between Barton and Cleethorpes was temporarily reduced to every 2 hours. And as I'm doing this video 33 years later, in 2025, that temporary reduction of service is still there. It's still 2 hourly between Cleethorpes and Barton-on-Humber as I'm recording this. So the railway connection to the pier was removed in about 2024, I think, about last year. It's either 2023 or 2024. But the pier itself survives. It's still in use as the former New Holland Bulk Services terminal. It's now owned by Peel Ports, and it's part of Peel Ports' Humber Bulk Terminal. So next up we're going to look at some photographs of the railways and the pier of New Holland. Most of them were taken by my late father on the 10th of April 1981, a Friday in 1981, when my mother and father took me for a ride on the ferry before it ceased to run. I was 3.5 years old at the time and I don't remember much about it 40 odd years later, but I do recall that the seat cushion we sat on, or I sat on, in the little sort of buffet bar area of the ferry was loose, and as the ferry made a turn just after it left Hull Corporation Pier, the cushion slid off and dropped me onto the floor, which I found was hilarious, but my mum and dad weren't so impressed. I also remember getting a packet of crisps and a little bottle of pop from the buffet, and I do recall walking along New Holland Pier, if only vaguely. I can't remember how we got back up. I know we walked down from New Holland Pier to New Holland Town, but I don't know if we got the train back or not, and I can't remember the crossing coming back, although obviously we did come back because I grew up in Hull and not New Holland. So there we have the 3.5-year-old Pacer Chaser on the deck of the ferry Farringford on that long lost Friday in spring of 1981. So as we said earlier on, the Humber ferry was operated for many years by paddle steamers because propeller-driven vessels couldn't have operated it at low tide. And in 1974, the Farringford was transferred from Lymington Pier to Yarmouth Isle of Wight service. From 1978, it appears to have worked the service alone, as that was the year that the last steamer was withdrawn, as we said. Farringford was built for the Southern Railway by Denny's of Dumbarton on the River Clyde, and it was launched in March 1947. It passed the British Railways on nationalisation in 1948, and it continued to work its original route, the Lymington to Yarmouth one, until it moved to Humberside in 1974. After the New Holland to Hull service ceased, DEPV Farringford, DEPV being diesel electric paddle vessel, was stored at Hull, and it was broken up in Hull in March 1984. Oddly enough, I would see part of the vessel again 35 years later, or thereabouts, because in the early 2020s I lived in some flats in Cleethorpes called Farringford House, and in the communal store was a lamp glass from the vessel, complete with the name etched into the glass. So the next photo is one that my dad took from the deck of the Farringford as it crossed the River Humber. The River Humber can be very choppy at times, but as you can see on the 10th of April 1981 it was quite calm. You can see Hull and a number of vessels moored at the various landing stages in that city across in the distance. I could only assume that my dad was running out of film at the time, approaching the end of a film, because he didn't seem to have used that much of it. He didn't take that many photos by his standards. And for example, he didn't take a close-up of the pier buildings at New Holland Pier Station. Luckily, we've got this view by Martin Addison, taken in early 1981 and shared under Wikimedia Commons Licence 2.0. As you can see, there were 2 platforms, although the nearest one to the camera was out of use and trackless by the time of this view. Where the trackbed widens out between the 2 platforms, there had been a short siding in the middle. and that had been used to stable coal wagons. Usually, looking at photographs, they were 21-ton opens, and they carried coal for the paddle steamers. The coal was manually shovelled into four-wheeled tubs, which were pushed down the slope to the ferry itself and tipped into the bunkers of the vessel. When the steamers ceased running in 1978, there was no reason to keep the siding, so it was removed. Cars were carried on the ferries. The Farringford could carry 812 passengers and 36 cars, although it's doubtful that capacity was ever required on the Humber route. But the cars accessed the ferry by driving along the platform that the photographer is standing on, which would be a health and safety nightmare if it happened today. In the days of the steamers, vehicles were loaded onto and off the ferry by means of a crane, but I'm unsure what the procedure was for the Farringford. The vessel was listed as being roll-on and roll-off capable, but I don't know if the piers, etc., were modified to allow this to happen on the New Holland to Hull route. And sadly, all the records of the Humber ferries that I've been able to find seem to end with the withdrawal of the final steamers. If you're very lucky, there's just a footnote on them that says a diesel vessel replaced them. And if you're extremely lucky indeed, there's a mention of the name of the actual vessel, the Farringford. So in this one you can see the somewhat dilapidated looking station buildings. You can also see the disused New Holland Pier signal box in the foreground on the opposite platform. So my father did take this view of the station from a distance as we walked down the pier. The downline was still in place to around halfway down the pier, as you can see. You can see both lines are still here. You can see the downline swinging across to join the upline just beyond the little shunting signal there. And then it was single line from there up to the buffer stops at the pier station. A Derby Class 114 DMU, more about those in a minute, can be seen at the platform in the distance. And as we said, the normal procedure was for a train to come in from Cleethorpes and then work back out to Barton, and then vice versa. So another one would come in almost at the same time and just work from Barton to Cleethorpes via New Holland Pier. I think at one time two trains had been stacked in the platform, so one would come in and go out from in front of the other one. But by this time they were passing each other around about the area of New Holland Town Station, as far as I can tell. So we've already mentioned the little LNER shunting signal in the middle of the tracks there. And you can just about see the gas lamps on the pier as well in this view. And there's a slightly better view of the gas lamp and the shunting signal there. You can see the gas lamps on the other platform as well, and the DMU still in the distance, as the passager's mum holds his hand, and the passenger himself looks rather nervously through a gap in the pier at the water flowing below. So you'll be pleased to know that was the last photo of the young Pacer for this video, so don't have nightmares, please sleep well. So next up we've got a Class 114 DMU making its way along the pier. The driver's already changed the lights for the return journey, and therefore it's showing a red tail light on the front, but it's actually still approaching the pier station at this point as the photo was taken. 49 Class 114s were built by British Railways at Derby Works between September of 1956 and July of 1957. There were two carriage units comprised of a driving motor brake second, or DMBS car, and a driver trailing composite lavatory DTCL car, and in this view the DMBS is leading. The class spent almost its entire life at Lincoln Depot, although a few sets worked out of Darnall in Sheffield for a while in the 1960s, and the surviving vehicles went to Tyseley at Birmingham when Lincoln Depot closed in 1987. They worked mainly in Lincolnshire and on routes from that county to places like Nottingham, Doncaster and Sheffield, but thanks to a pooling arrangement with Leeds, Neville Hill and Hull Botanic Gardens depots, whereby the three sheds could use each other's units, they also appeared regularly in West Yorkshire and around the Hull area. Indeed, a Class 114 was one of the units involved in the tragic accident at Lockington in East Yorkshire in 1986, whilst working from Bridlington to Hull. The unit in this view carries the short-lived refurbished livery of off-white with a blue band. When the first DMUs were refurbished in the mid-1970s, they were painted in this scheme, but it will come as no surprise to find that it proved hard to keep clean. So later refurbishments were put into the former Intercity livery of blue with grey window surrounds, the livery that most enthusiasts didn't like at the time but now go absolutely mad for. The refurbished units were repainted blue and grey as soon as practical. Incidentally, a 50th Class 114 was built, or an identical unit. It didn't survive long enough to receive the actual tops class, but a 50th identical unit was built except it had Rolls-Royce engines as opposed to the BUT engines of the normal class, and they were later replaced with Leyland engines on the other 49. The Rolls-Royce unit was used as a test bed at various places, including the Lake District, but was withdrawn as non-standard in 1967 and scrapped. Presumably it didn't occur to anybody just to fit it with ordinary engines and put it at Lincoln with the rest of them. So as I mentioned, we walked down from New Holland Pier to New Holland Town Station, and arriving at New Holland Town, my father took this rather lovely shot from the Barrow crossing, which connected the two platforms. Looking along the pier with the pier station in the far distance, period features abound once again. From the bench on the platform to the towering and seemingly disused telegraph poles and the canopies on the shelter and understation building. The platform starting signal has got a shunting arm underneath it that's white with red edges. So whilst we're at town, another train arrived, again a class 114. On this set the DMBS is leading again, and it carries the new blue and grey livery, or new to these units anyway, whilst the DTCL is another one to carry the refurbished blue with a white with a blue band. The Barton line can be seen curving right behind the unit and marked by the tall signal appearing to stick out of the cab roof. The signal for trains coming from the Cleethorpes direction can be seen in the left background. The final view from 1981 is of this lovely old sign, the British Railways Eastern Region blue coloured enamel sign for New Holland, with the exhortation to change for Barton on Humber. Apparently quite a lot of these signs went missing between our visit and the actual end of service. The day by day the number of them around the place seemed to reduce. So I'm sure a lot of enthusiasts, or a number of enthusiasts, have got them somewhere in their sheds, spare rooms, etc. Back in April 1981, many stations around the network were yet to receive modern signage, but of course the two at New Holland were never going to receive it because they closed around 11 weeks after these photographs were taken. So as we said earlier, the two New Holland stations were replaced by a halt called New Holland in 1981. It was a basic timber structure, as can be seen here, and it featured a bus shelter type building which was just behind the photographer in this picture. It's shown here to good effect in the 2010s in a photo by J. Lucas, again shared under Wikimedia Commons licence 2.0, and depicting the class 153, unit 153332, departing for Barton on Humber and heading away from the camera. Ignored the destination blind, it was common practice on this line to run with Cleethorpes on the relevant end of the unit and Barton on Humber on the other one, to avoid winding the blind after every trip. Next to the 153 is the rusty and overgrown track leading onto the pier, as you can just about see in this picture. As we said, it received a handful of trial freight operations over the years, but they were never destined to receive regular traffic, and it was removed in 2024. The 153 is about to pass over Barrow Road level crossing, and it's obscuring the great central signal box that controls it, the crossing box. So the final two views in this video are by Chris. Again, they're shared under Wikimedia Commons licence 2.0, and they were taken in 2014. And the stunning aerial views of New Holland and its pier taken from a light aircraft flying above. In the first shot we can see a cargo ship moored at the pier. At least we kind of moved the photo correctly. There we go. You can see the pier itself, the remains of the building just at the bottom of the picture there under the wing strut of the aircraft. And you can see a conveyor as well that was installed in the 1980s to carry goods taken off the ships down to the main depot on the landward end of the pier. The site of Town Station is where the store of what appears to be coal is in the middle of the picture. You can just about see there. That's sort of where New Holland Town was, the landward end, and going round there. And that pile of coal also covers a spare round to the Barton line from the pier direction that was removed in 1981. The surviving railway line comes in at a diagonal angle across there. You can see it coming in and then curving round through the new halt and going out along there in sort of 90 degrees to the edge of the photograph. And you can just see the dock at New Holland peering in on the left hand side as well, now without its railway connection. In the second view, the railway is more prominent. You can see it coming in at the bottom of the shot. And you can just about see, I think, the hedgerow that marks the site of the line into the docks so that would have gone off where my fingers go in there to the actual dock itself. And then the railway curves around Oxmarsh Crossing, and its controlling signal box are just here. It curves around the station. The new station built in 1981 is about there. Barrow Road crossing just beyond it, and then the line curves around and heads off towards Barton on Humber. And you can see where the freight line goes through onto the pier there as well. And the pier juts out into the River Humber quite defiantly, and the Humber itself and the sky blend into one in the distance there. What a lovely, lovely shot. If you've got any interest in the railways of New Holland and the place itself, then this is the book to read. Railways to New Holland and the Humber Ferries by A.J. Ludlam, published by the Oakwood Press. They've reissued it quite a few times. This edition I've had for about 30 years, but they've done it more recently since then as well. And it's available from quite a lot of booksellers, mainly second hand, but readily available on the internet if you are interested and you want more information. A lot of information in this video has come from this book. So that is it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. One of the things I do remember from that little trip many years ago is just how peaceful it was walking along the pier and at New Holland town station when there was no trains about. It was just a really peaceful, quiet place. It's not anymore. If you go to New Holland, it's bustling. The former Humber Bulk terminal is still in use, and it's you know, there's always a hive of activity, which is good. It's nice to see some employment and activity in the area. But yeah, it was really peaceful and bucolic, and just very nice, and long lost days, and I'm privileged to have seen them. So I hope you've enjoyed the look back at those days. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.